very glad to have you join us today. Welcome to the Deep Dive Workshop number 7 in the Asia Clean Energy Forum. Our workshop today is titled From Dreams to Reality, Achieving NDCs Through Power Sector Planning and Implementation. So we're really excited to have you join this session, which I think will be very interesting for many stakeholders in the region. And we look forward to a very productive discussion with our experts. So we'll have poll questions that you'll be able to answer during the session, and at the end we'll have a Q&A session. So we encourage you to please submit questions through the Q&A feature. So without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce Steve Olive, who is the Mission Director for the USAID Development Mission in Asia. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Ilya, and good morning, everyone. It really is an honor and a pleasure to welcome you this morning to the Deep Dive Workshop on From Dreams to Reality, Achieving NDCs Through Power Sector Planning and Implementation. On behalf of the United States Agency for International Development, let me thank the Asian Development Bank again for hosting the 16th Asia Clean Energy Forum. I want to thank our co-organizers for this specific event, which includes the German Corporation for International Cooperation, the International Energy Agency, the World Resource Institute, and the United States Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory. We are here today because we believe that profitable clean energy development is both necessary and achievable, but only if we act collectively. While all countries have unique social, economic, and environmental development objectives, collaboration is needed to find sustainable ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Many countries in Asia are already on the path to decarbonizing their power sectors. As part of that effort, they are also meeting their nationally determined contributions or even raising them. For example, in 2020, amidst the COVID-19 global pandemic, over 9 gigawatts of rooftop solar systems were installed in Vietnam. This is equivalent to 6 coal-fired power plants and represents a 25-fold increase in solar development compared to the previous year. Similarly, in Indonesia, the state-run utility, PLN, has announced that no new coal plants will be built after 2023, thus paving the way for more rapid transition to clean energy technologies. In addition, in India, the pace of renewable energy development is accelerating to meet an ambitious but achievable target of 450 gigawatts deployed by 2030. For decades, USAID has engaged with thought leaders from utilities, private sector firms, universities, innovators, and other donor agencies to accelerate the scaling up of renewable energy. The Biden-Harris administration continues to elevate this priority both domestically and abroad. In South and Southeast Asia alone, our programs have helped to mobilize $11 billion for clean energy development in the past 6 years. This resulted in almost 20 gigawatts of new generation capacity into the grid, or an equivalent of about 11 million tons of carbon dioxide reduced or avoided each year. As renewable energy prices continue to drop across the globe, countries face a unique opportunity to accelerate the development of new renewable energy capacity. To do this effectively, however, they will need innovative and collaborative solutions to ensure a stable supply of affordable and reliable electricity. These solutions are the focus of today's event. During the Deep Dive Workshop, you will learn from our panel of technical experts about the critical role of stakeholder engagement throughout energy transitions the importance of high quality, accessible data for strategic energy planning and decision making, and regional examples of implementation activities that enable renewable and other clean energy technologies. I believe, as well as others, that these game-changing technologies, forward-thinking policies, and new approaches to mobilizing investments will enable us to navigate a clean, reliable, and affordable energy future. I look forward to moving ahead together with all of you. I hope this workshop will stimulate discussion, innovative ideas, and fruitful partnerships. I wish you all success in the event, and thank you so much for your participation and dedication to advancing clean energy in the region. Back to you, Ilya.
Thank you, Steve. And thanks for that excellent context setting for the rest of our discussion today. So with that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Patricia Romero-Lencrow is a senior research analyst and scientist at NREL's Center for Integrated Mobility Sciences. So over to you, Patty.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to present today. I will share with you some insights, some reflections based on work we have been doing in Latin America and in Asia. And as already was indicated by Steve, a series of trends and challenges can be harnessed to support a clean and a just energy transition. For instance, in the area of transportation, we are already witnessing and expecting an expansion of electric vehicles and of charging infrastructure. The buildings sector is experiencing a shift to grid interactive and connected communities through deployment of distributed energy resources. And the power sector, a key player in this game, is also shifting and relying increasingly on the use of renewable energy. Two key cut-crossing trends are already taking place. For once, although the pandemic has created a lot of havoc, it is also opening a huge opportunity to create synergies, not only between the transformations and technological innovations that we are experiencing, but also they are offering the possibility to create jobs and to create a green economy. Policies are playing a key role in this process. And these policies relate not only to subsidies or regulations, but also to land use planning, without which it won't be possible even to decide where to put plants and where to build infrastructure. Something I would like to share with you are a series of lessons that we have learned so far about energy transitions, such as the one we are currently witnessing. And this was the idea to understand what best practices can be adapted to projects and to programs. The first key and fundamental transition is that a mismatch exists between the imperative for a deep and fast transition, such as the one suggested by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is asking us to reduce our emissions greatly if we are to stay within the limit of 1.5 average temperature in the near future. And the fact that, as we know from our study of historic and recent transitions, these have been and will continue to be inherently prolong affairs. You can see in these beautiful figures that a colleague of mine shared with me that it has taken many years to create, to formate the technologies that we are enjoying currently. It also takes decades for these technologies to go from the experimental phase to its deployment. That said, we know from experience that it is possible to accelerate some of these transitions if we collaborate, if we engage with the private sector and the civil society communities. Another important lesson to consider is that we need to, that often the focus is on the shallow points and levels of change. We tend to focus on individual behavior. And while this is important, while it is important to tell people not to use plastic or not to or to use transit, it is also important to target the systemic factors that induce behavior, such as the systems of provision of transportation, of energy, and most importantly, it is fundamental to target the deeper leverage points. And which are those? I remember in some work we did in Mexico City, some decision makers, even from the private sector, were indicating that a key challenge we face is to move away from the car-centric paradigm to alternative modes of transportation. And that can be said about the way we live. We know that a pattern of urban sprawl is not necessarily the best we can continue promoting if we want to shift away from our current ways of living and producing. Policies are and have played major influences. As we can see from this chart, state and local governments, and not only national governments, are playing key roles in promoting technological innovations, in promoting policies that aim at fulfilling climate goals and mitigation strategies. There are also many examples, I'm including here some related to the transportation sector, of policies promoting the electrification of the fleet. In this case, in countries that are playing a key role, such as Canada, China, the European countries, India, Japan, and the United States. But there are other countries in Southeast Asia that are increasingly promoting policies seeking to electrify the fleet. However, and this is also very important for us in this workshop to pay attention to, policies and innovations can be seen as incompatible with the realities of many communities where they are promoted. And they can also affect some groups negatively while benefiting others. By so doing, they can exacerbate inequality and injustice. And just now, the Biden-Harris administration is promoting efforts to consider these inequalities. I will refer to what can be done to address this. And this was the idea to learn how is it that we can decarbonize the grid, how can we decarbonize the transportation sector while at the same time making sure that we promote more equitable patterns of development. And here I really want to share this beautiful cartoon. The idea is not to provide everyone with the same supports or innovations, because many users have different needs. The idea is to provide different sectors and different communities with the supports that they need for them to be equally able, in this case, to watch soccer, right? But in other cases, to have mobility options, to have electricity. And this means that we need to include principles of justice in our policy efforts so that instead of increasing inequality and resentment, we foster equality and we get people on, we get the buy-in of different sectors of the society. There are three principles, three tenets of energy that are increasingly being considered in efforts to promote just energy transitions. The first one, procedural justice, seeks to more meaningfully enable participation of underrepresented and underserved communities. The second, recognition justice, seeks to listen to different sectors of the population and to address past energy inequities. The third, not least important, distributional justice, is to implement energy transitions while improving energy outcomes across different sectors of the population to make sure that the risks are reduced and the benefits are equally distributed. Many of you have already heard different scholars talking about the need to promote climate, environmental, and energy justice. And I would like to claim, using this very nice visual, that although they target different elements of the climate challenge and the energy challenge, they really are related by the fact that what we seek by promoting these principles is to make sure that we enhance or create more equal conditions, and by so doing really prevent injustices and resentments from happening. What actionable strategies can we suggest to foster just and energy transitions? Well, if we are including or considering a decision-making process, which we are representing here, it is important to represent not only the needs or to capture the needs of different sectors of the population, but also to identify underrepresented groups and to enhance their capabilities to participate in the decision-making process beyond consultation, to really be able to be part of the solution by co-developing programs and solutions. And equally important for many decision-making processes is to evaluate performance and progress. And for that purpose, we are developing different metrics. I will provide you some examples of these metrics. I would just like to say that in a couple of workshops we have been organizing, we were able to come up with 3 key actionable strategies that many decision makers and stakeholders can include in their palette of strategies. For once, it is important to use a series of technical solutions that are socially and culturally sensitive to the context in which they are implemented. Meaning, what can work for the US might not work for Vietnam or for India. It needs to be adapted to the conditions of these countries. It is important to engage in inclusive processes that consider the needs of different sectors, of the different private stakeholders, community stakeholders, and to really generate visions for the future that consider their realities and their needs. And it is important to pursue synergies and to reduce trade-offs and address trade-offs between the technical assistance that we are providing and the priorities and values and needs of the communities that are receiving our technical support. I would like just to close with some examples of principles and of metrics that we can use to evaluate performance in the area of justice. One key principle is affordability. It is not only necessary to promote clean technologies, it is equally important to make sure that these technologies translate into affordable housing and transportation, which are two sectors that will benefit from the current energy transition. It is equally fundamental to measure accountability, and there are already metrics to measure for that purpose. One example is to measure participation in decision making. And in terms of the transition to a clean economy and clean energy sector, we know that many existing sectors depending on coal and on other technologies based on the use of fossil fuels, when we transition away from these, we might create problems, impacts on the workforce. So therefore, it is important to create programs that cultivate business innovation and that train the workforce for it to participate in these new sectors of the economy. Meaning, we need to also measure that and make sure that we are training this workforce for them to be able to participate in the green economy, which promises a lot. But again, if we don't include different sectors of the population, we might create problems that then will come back to us and will create polarization and discontent. So with this, I want to close, and I again want to thank you for allowing me to participate in this workshop.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I'm sure that many in our audience are very interested in this topic of energy justice, especially as countries pursue their NDCs and try to navigate increasing the share of renewable energy in their system. So if you have questions, please do submit them to the Q&A. We would like this to be a very interactive session, and we look forward to the answering your questions to Patty and to the other speakers during the Q&A panel session. Now, next we'll have a poll. If I could please have the poll up on the screen. So it looks like we're having some technical difficulties. Maybe we can postpone the poll until after the next speaker. Okay, so you should be able to see the poll on your screens. And the question is, which of the following will be the greatest challenge for increasing the share of renewable energy in your country in the next decade? And choose one of these options. So is it distribution system issues? Is it the technical limits of conventional power plants and bulk power transmission? Is it access to financing and risk mitigation? Is it access to data and tools for advanced power system planning? Is it power market structure and existing contracts for power plants? Or is it something else? So choose one of these for your poll answer, and we will review the answers after the next presentation. Okay, and with that, let's move to our next speaker. So It's my pleasure to introduce Galen McLaurin. He is the group manager of the Geospatial Data Science Group, and he'll be presenting on some exciting new high-quality data that NREL has developed for the Southeast Asia region. So over to you, Galen.
Great, thank you, Leah, and thank you, Steve, for your introductions. So let me jump ahead here. So just a roadmap for my talk today. I'm first going to talk about why high-quality data is important for decision-making and talk about the types of analyses that can inform these decisions. I'm going to give a quick introduction to the Renewable Energy Data Explorer, which is an online tool developed at NREL to visualize, analyze, and download high-quality renewable energy data. And then I'm going to spend most of my time in a deep dive into a high-fidelity solar data set that we have produced. We've just finished completion of the data set at NREL. And then I want to close by wrapping this back towards long-term energy planning and grid integration analysis, and just talking exactly about how these data support those types of modeling. So we've laid this out. We have analyses on the left that inform decisions on the right. And so they are actually kind of more or less organized linear here, where we have, mapping and visualization, a very, desktop analysis that informs decisions like renewable energy target setting, high-level prospecting. Then we have energy system generation and cost analysis, which can inform investment and finance decisions. We assess technical potential, which can inform, more early and mid-stage prospecting. And then we do capacity expansion modeling, which supports decisions on long-term energy deployment. And then we do production cost modeling that informs grid integration, power system improvement plans, and how we operate our systems. And what really ties these together is high fidelity data. So we really need to be able to represent the important components in these analyses with the high fidelity data. And as you all are probably very familiar, many of these analyses, all of these analyses really start with your resource data, your solar, your wind data. So like I said, I just want to spend a brief moment here to present the RE Data Explorer, because it's a portal where we make the data I'm going to be talking about available, as well as many other data sets. I'm going to be focusing on Southeast Asia, but this is a global tool. The web link is there below, re-explorer.org. So this is a very user-friendly geospatial analysis platform for exploring renewable energy data, doing some high-level analysis, and it's really valuable for engaging stakeholders and decision makers and talking about the impacts of different policies. So you can perform visualizations, like I said, some analysis tools, and it's a very powerful repository for downloading high resolution spatial and temporal data. Okay, so now I wanna jump into the meat of the talk here and talk about this new solar resource data set that we have just completed. And first, I just wanna acknowledge my team. This was a very big team that embarked on this. Just want to really acknowledge all of their contributions. So I just want to start first with the underlying model, and then I'll dig into exactly how we apply it and what the data looks like, how we produce it. So over a decade of research has developed NREL's physical solar model, or the PSM. So the PSM is a set of radiative transfer models that represents how the solar radiation passes through the atmosphere, interacts with gases and different components of the atmosphere, such as water, CO2, and ozone. It also models how that solar radiation interacts with the surface through representing albedo, which is essentially the reflectivity of the land's surface, represented through different land cover types and how reflective they are. It considers the components of the atmosphere that are principal to estimating the solar radiance, which are clouds and aerosols. Aerosols are large particulates in the atmosphere, such as pollution, dust, or smoke. And clouds in this model are represented with extremely high fidelity. So we're capturing the the optical thickness of clouds, the type of clouds, whether water clouds or ice clouds, and other characteristics that impact the scattering and absorption of the solar radiation as it passes through the atmosphere. So the PSM estimates the direct and the diffuse components of solar radiance at a single location at a single time step. So in developing this data set, we used the publicly available Himawari satellite imagery. This is a geostationary weather satellite from the Japanese Meteorological Agency, which is stationed just south of Tokyo over the equator. This is a recent, very high resolution weather satellite that captures images at 2-kilometer spatial resolution and 10-minute intervals. So in this project, we've partnered with the University of Wisconsin, which has one of the best-in-class Bayesian cloud classification algorithms. So with that, the satellite imagery, they characterize and classify the clouds at each time step for each pixel. And then that data gets passed over to NREL. So harnessing NREL's high-performance computing system, we essentially batch the PSM for hundreds of millions of times at each pixel across each 10-minute time step. And we produce 5 years of data from this new Himawari 8 satellite. And we produce estimates for 3 solar radiance measures. Let me just explain these real quickly for those that aren't familiar. So the direct normal irradiance, the diffuse horizontal irradiance, and the global horizontal irradiance. So the first is essentially your direct beam of irradiance. If you were to imagine that the solar disk in the sky, the direct beam of light, that is the direct normal irradiance. The diffuse horizontal irradiance is, imagine if you were to take a round dinner plate and hold it up to cover that solar disk perfectly. So all of the irradiance that is reaching your eye is diffuse. It is not the direct beam. And then the global horizontal irradiance is essentially a combination of those two that captures the total irradiance at each time step given the solar zenith angle of the sun. So these are the 3 solar radiance measures that we model that are fundamental in modeling solar energy generation for photovoltaic systems, but also for concentrating solar power. We also provide ancillary meteorological variables, which are necessary for high accuracy estimate of solar generation, such as temperature, wind speed, relative humidity, and albedo. So I'm focusing right here on the most recent data that we produced, but we have just completed another 5 years of data from the Himawari 7 satellite. And so the goal here was to produce a full 10 years of data. So that Himawari 7 satellite is a little bit coarser resolution. It's 4-kilometer, 30-minute data, but together that gives us a 10-year record. And in the coming months, we will be also producing a typical meteorological year, which is used very much across the solar industry and in research as well. And so pay attention for that as we make that available as well. We've done an extensive validation of this data set. And so essentially we modeled it, we validate the model, not the data set itself. And so using a extensive set of measurement stations from the Baseline Surface Radiation Network, we validated the first 5 years, and we're just completing validation of the earlier 5 years of this data set. And the validation of this model shows that this data set is equally accurate as other data sets that are produced in a similar way by NREL. If any of you are familiar with the National Solar Radiation Database that covers the Americas, is using the same PSM model. And so our annual mean bias is typically less than 5%, which is really quite high quality for such a satellite-based physical solar radiation model. So to wrap this up, so hopefully I can. I have an animation here. Hopefully we'll play. And so the result here, as you can see, this is one day in 2019, and it's showing the solar radiance across space and time. And as you can see here, the importance of representing those clouds with extremely high fidelity. As a cloud passes over the overhead, it essentially reduces the direct solar radiance to an extremely low level. So it's really important to capture that with extremely high fidelity. Also, like I mentioned, the aerosols are really important. So those particulates in the air, the pollution, dust, smoke, as we see, increasing urbanization, more pollution in our cities, and across the world, we're seeing a lot of wildfires creating a lot of smoke. And we always have water powders that push up a lot of dust in the atmosphere. So capturing these are really important. So again, those components really impact the solar radiance. Okay. So like I said, I want to tie this back into the broader conversations of this conference, and really focusing on modeling our future energy systems. So these data are absolutely fundamental for capacity expansion modeling. As we're going to model the capacity value of new additions of solar energy deployment, we really need to be able to capture that at high spatial resolutions, at least hourly. And we need to be able to do that with high spatial fidelity, because that's really what's going to inform long-term energy planning and really give our stakeholders the most accurate information on which to base their decisions. And then production cost modeling requires even higher fidelity data in the temporal domain. So production cost modeling can be done definitely at hourly intervals, but often we want to do that even finer temporal resolutions, because that's the resolution that power systems are actually operated at, somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes. So our production cost modeling is really important to inform grid integrations and how we're going to operate those systems with more variable renewable sources of energy in the future. So I will conclude there. Thank you for participating in this panel. I look forward to the discussion and questions later on. I'll pass it back to you, Ilya.
Thanks, Galen. That was a great introduction to some of the RE data that is available out there, produced by NREL. And I'm sure that many of the participants are interested in learning more about that data and accessing it. So if you are, submit questions to the Q&A, and we'll take your questions during the panel session. So now let's go to the results of the first poll question that I asked. And just as a reminder, the question was, which of the following will be the greatest challenge for increasing the share of renewable energy in your country in the next decade? So we have 15% for distribution system issues, 25% for access to financing and risk management, risk mitigation, 20% for access to data and tools for advanced power system planning. So for those 20% of you who chose that option, I think you'll have several questions for Galen about how to access those data and how to access the tools that he was mentioning. And then 40%, which is the winner in this poll, is the power market structure and existing contracts. And so this is a very interesting result. I think that it'll also have some implications for the conversation regarding energy justice and how possibly changing contracts for the existing power plants might cause issues for communities that rely on those power plants for their economic activity. So really interesting results here. Also, just want to mention the fact that no one chose technical limits of conventional power plants and bulk power transmission as their answer. And I think that's a really telling sign, because maybe 5 years ago, this might have been a much more popular answer as far as a challenge for increasing the share of RE. But we know that we've made great strides in understanding what are the limits of grid integration. And we understand the capabilities of power plants really well now, and how to manage the variability and uncertainty of renewable energy. So that's an interesting result there. Okay, well, with that, I'm happy to introduce our next expert speaker. Is Sunil Kumar Sharma. He is the technical expert in energy transition with distribution utilities projects under the Indo-German Energy Program at GIZ. the German Development Agency. So really excited to have Sunil here, and over to you, Sunil.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ilya, for the kind introduction. I would also like to thank Steve for setting the context for this show, and then very interesting presentations from Patricia and Gamplor. So I think the poll, the results you just showed that none of the participants in this session believe that the transmission or grid integration, technical solutions related to grid integration is a major challenge for achieving the NDC targets, or to integrate more renewables in the system. And to some extent, I agree with them, because if you talk about the situation a decade before, everyone was talking about the topic of grid integration, and specifically the policymakers and the grid planners and grid operators were a little apprehensive. Would they be able to integrate large shares of renewables into their system without having negative impact on the system itself? So we have come to that situation or that position now, when the grid operators, the planners, the modelers have a lot of faith, have a lot of confidence in our technical solutions, and they believe that technology wise, grid integration of renewables is not a major challenge now. Probably financing, data, or as you already mentioned, the winner was power market structure. So these may pose more challenges as compared to the technical solutions which are available for deployment. So that was a brief context about the overall presentation. In my presentation, I would be talking about the renewable energy management centers for large-scale grid integration of renewable energy in India. We undertook this activity under a project called Green Energy Corridors. So if you talk about the Green Energy Corridor project of Government of India, it is essentially about transmission planning. And why is it important to plan your transmission infrastructure well in advance? Because transmission lines take 5 years to come. It takes at least 5 years to install them. While renewable energy generators, if you are talking about the large scale solar and wind power producers, they can install their capacities within 12 months. So these capacities are of no use if you cannot evacuate them, and you cannot utilize that megawatt and convert that megawatt into megawatt hours for consumption. So the overall transmission planning process started in 2012, but then I will come to that a little later. I would like to give a brief overview of this entire exercise in the perspective of India's NDC targets. So in 2015, India announced its NDC targets, and one of the major component under these targets was that up to 2030, we will have at least 40% of our installed power capacity, power generation capacity, from non-fossil fuel-based sources. And when we made this commitment in 2015, we were hardly 10%, even below that. And here I'm talking about megawatt, not megawatt hour. So just a quick glance on the recent data. So up to April 2021, where have we reached in terms of those NDC targets for deployment of renewable energy? So in India, in April 2021, we have an overall 383 gigawatt installed capacity overall. And majority of it comes from thermal generation, coal. That means 61% of the generation is through coal or gas or lignite. Then the next major contributor is already renewables. So 95 gigawatt plus is coming from renewable sources, and in these renewable sources, we are excluding large hydro because this is a problem of legacy definition. So we do not count hydro projects about 25 megawatt capacity as RE projects. We count them as hydro. So if we count them as well, then 25 plus 12, 37% of the installed capacity is already through renewable energy sources. And now what is the projection? The projection for 2030 is that in 2030, the overall installed capacity in India would be around 817 gigawatt. And out of that overall total, the thermal generation will lose its, its charm. From 61 to 36, it will reduce to, and renewable energy, majorly wind and solar, would contribute to more than 53%. And 76 gigawatt or 9% of the capacity would come from solar. So in a nutshell, we are optimistic that by 2030, we would cross even 60% of the overall installed capacity in the power sector from non-fossil fuel generators. But that is, just megawatt. And we don't need only megawatts, we need megawatt hours, so that we can so it is very important to integrate these generators into the grid and optimally utilize their generation when we need it. So coming back to the discussion, I've already introduced about the Green Energy Corridor project of Government of India, wherein they started planning for the transmission lines to accommodate their ambitious RE targets, to accommodate that generation and evacuate it. And under that Green Energy Corridor planning process, renewable energy management centers were also envisaged as a control infrastructure for managing the renewable energy. So a logical question would be, okay, the Green Energy Corridor was announced way back in 2013-14. What is the status right now? So I can give you a brief about the current status. So under the GEC, the first component of the GEC, we have already installed more than 40,000 MVA substation capacity transmission lines. And we are also planning for our transmission infrastructure build up for our 2030 targets. So that exercise is still going on at Government of India level. Now, coming to the specifics of Renewable Energy Management Center, we first need to understand, why do we need, renewable energy, a separate center to manage renewable energy generation. So that brings me to the point of grid operation and how the operational planning through grid operators would change in future, or already changing in many countries. In India as well, it has changed in the recent past, because the grid operators were accustomed to dispatch the large generators, 1000 megawatt, 2000 megawatt thermal generators, and their forecast for their schedule was almost impeccable. So they could deliver 990 megawatt if they schedule 990 megawatt. But such is not the case with wind and solar. You need to forecast them because they are highly dependent on weather parameters. So if I do not know what would be the generation from wind and solar tomorrow, I may even not know what can I schedule from my thermal generation. That means Because of renewables, there is a lot more flexibility requirement within the grid planning, operational planning from load side as well as thermal generation side. And on top of that, there are plans in India to integrate e-vehicles into the grid, which will utilize the grid electricity to charge their batteries. And some consumers which are going for demand response, that means they are becoming flexible. Generation from rooftop solar projects, that means the distribution operator must know what is their requirement, what is their load requirement tomorrow, considering that there would be some generation and consumption through that rooftop solar capacity. So in a nutshell, with increasing penetration of renewables and e-mobility, the grid operators require innovative and analytical tools and skill sets to integrate these new technologies. I'm not saying it's not doable, but one need to already acknowledge the fact and already start planning for this. So just a glimpse of where do we stand in terms of maximum instantaneous penetration and maximum daily penetration of wind and solar in our system. The data is a little old, represents data of 2019, and I have taken a few renewable energy rich states in India where the penetration is already high. And if I take just one example, Karnataka. So in Karnataka, we can already see that the maximum instantaneous penetration from wind and solar has already reached 90% in 2019. And there are some parts of India now which even cater to 100% of the demand through renewable capacities for some minutes. I would not say for the entire day or for the entire year, but for some minutes. So we are reaching that phase when in our system, renewable is catering to the entire demand. And there are high chances that in future, we would have more generation from renewable than our demand. So would the batteries play a role there? That's just a question to ponder upon. Now, coming to the concept of renewable energy management centers in India. So there are a few functionalities for which these renewable energy management centers were designed. So the first and foremost was to forecast the generation from wind and solar generating stations. Number two was to monitor these power projects, to have visibility of these power projects at the control center of a grid operator. And then they also act as the central repository for all the data related to renewable energy generation or installed capacity, and that data would be very useful for all the future data analytical applications we wish to deploy in our control centers. We have a dedicated renewable energy scheduling tool within the Renewable Energy Management Center, and REMCs also act as the coordination agency on behalf of the load dispatch centers in the state. So a basic architecture I would like to explain here. There are 3-4 major components here. So if you see, the first component here is REMC SCADA. So the SCADA system's functionality is to visualize the generating stations to see where they are located and how much capacity is there and how much they are generating in real time. So that information is coming through the SCADA system, nothing new in that. The second tool is RE forecasting tool. So this was something new when we introduced it in 2015-16. So and that was just the discussion phase. At that time in India, no one was forecasting the generation from renewable energy projects. So under this proposal, we said that we need one RE forecasting tool within these REMCs. This tool will receive inputs from 3 independent forecast service providers, which would be selected through market approach. And it will also receive weather data from weather service providers. And what this RE forecasting tool will do, it will forecast what will be the generation tomorrow or day after or even today from renewable energy sources at different grid points. And then based on that information, the RE scheduling tool will schedule the generation. And this generation this scheduling information will also help the load dispatch center in scheduling the remaining load as compared to what is available from conventional generators. So this is the overall REMC architecture. I would come to the RE forecasting tool through one more slide, but before that, why do we need forecasting? As I already mentioned, this is the generation from wind and solar is highly dependent on weather conditions. And in India right now we have more than in 2022 we will have more than 20% of penetration from these sources, and then it would become very critical for us to forecast when are they producing and how much are they producing. It also helps in quantify the control reserves required in the grid, and then this helps in load dispatch centers decision how to balance their portfolio, how they what are their balancing requirements on day ahead and intraday basis. Just a brief about the forecasting module. So as I mentioned, it receives 3 inputs from 3 independent forecast service providers. There is one internal forecast module as well, which receives inputs from weather forecast data. And then SCADA data for RE generation is coming. And within this tool, there is a module called RE forecast combination and aggregation, which combines the forecast from all the service providers and come out with one single forecast, which is supposed to be more realistic, more accurate. Okay, so just the status of implementation of these REMCs. So we started the implementation in 11 locations in India, 7 at the state level and 3 at regional level, 1 at federal or national level. And all of these REMCs are now operational since 2019 onwards. And they are already showing some good performance. Now, the conclusion and way forward, I think REMCs technically, if you see scheduling, SCADA, usage of SCADA was nothing new. I mean, it was even used by grid operators for scheduling or to visualize the generation from thermal projects as well. But the forecasting was something which was never initiated in India before 2016, and after that we started it, and now we are even learning. I would not say we have learned the trick of the trade, but we are still learning. So right now these REMCs are managing more than 60 gigawatt of wind and solar capacity in India, and because of their forecasts, the grid operators can schedule their other generators. There are already discussions within India that that all these states should implement REMCs in their control areas. And then one thing is very important is the skill upgradation. You may give certain tools to grid operators or the engineers, but it is very important to tell them how to use these tools. So even on that aspect, we worked a lot with the government agencies in India. So since I'm out of time, thanks a lot for your patience hearing, and I would be happy to take questions. Thank you. Back to you, Ilya.
Thank you so much, Sunil. Really interesting to hear about how REMCs have been developing in India and to hear some of the latest data on renewable energy penetration. So thank you for that. Now we do have another poll question. Let's put it up now, and I'll just quickly read the question itself. I won't be reading each option just for the interest of time, so we can have time for our next speaker and the panel discussion. So the question for the next poll is, what technology solutions do you prioritize for scaling up renewable energy in your country? And here you can choose multiple. Okay, so with that, I encourage you to please submit questions to the Q&A to our speakers and also answer the poll question. And in the meantime, I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Marlon Joseph Apanyada. He is the Southeast Asia Engagement Lead for the World Resources Institute, WRI. So Marlon, over to you.
Thank you, Ilya, and good morning, partners and colleagues, and welcome to the final day of what has been such an exciting, insights-filled, and inspiring whole week of the 2021 edition of the Asia Clean Energy Forum. I am Marlon Joseph Apanyada, Southeast Asia Engagement Lead for Climate and Energy for the World Resources Institute, or WRI, and Country Lead for the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator, or CEIA. Thank you to the Asian Development Bank and to the workshop organizers for having me as one of the speakers in this truly exciting deep dive workshop. Next slide, please. The Clean Energy Investment Accelerator, or CEIA, is an innovative public-private partnership that addresses barriers to clean energy deployment in the commercial and industrial sectors in emerging markets, which include Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. The CEIA is jointly led by the World Resources Institute, Allotrope Partners, and the US National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL, who are also joining us in this session. Each member brings a unique technical expertise to ensure successful country-based efforts led by local and regional staff, which is all supported by a wider global team. The program is supported by a range of public, private, and philanthropic partners, and we offer an innovative solution focused on 3 pillars: purchasers, policy, and pipeline. We partner with large energy purchasers to send a strong demand signal and deploy clean energy. And we collaborate with governments to strengthen policy frameworks. And we grow the clean energy project pipeline through transactions that have the power to move markets. Next slide, please. Private sector investment is essential to achieving enhanced NDCs. The CEIA works with large energy buyers to thrust sustainable market transformation. Government alone lacks the resources to invest in clean energy at the scale needed to achieve sustainable development. Particularly at this critical moment as governments develop economic recovery plans, there is an urgent need for private sector champions to promote country-focused green growth. In addition, the CEIA is working with electric utilities. Many utilities in emerging markets are in precarious financial situations and unable to obtain sufficient capital to expand capacity at pace with rapidly growing energy demands. We believe that private sector can play a powerful role in driving NDC progress and raising ambition by piloting innovative approaches that can be scaled across sectors, attracting new investment from a growing ecosystem of clean energy financiers, and promoting aligned policies to diversify clean energy purchasing options and green a country's energy mix in line with international renewable energy procurement principles. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes our unique value add to the ecosystem. The CEIA turns private sector commitments into in-country progress. The CEIA addresses a gap that is not independently filled by the private or public sector. And the CEIA proves the business case for first of its kind transactions that have the power to move markets, details of which we will present in the later slides. Next slide, please. The CEIA is working to help support efforts to build back better from COVID-19 by enabling sustainable economic recovery. Globally, $10 trillion of economic stimulus is needed to enable a sustainable recovery from the unprecedented and multifaceted impacts of the coronavirus crisis. But public budgets alone are not sufficient for recovery at the levels needed in target markets. Thus, private investment will be critical. Thus, the need for alternative business voices to inform recovery strategies and drive green growth. Next slide, please. Here we show a snapshot of the impact of the CEIA across the so-called VIP countries, or Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and through our work in Mexico and Colombia. The CEIA teams have provided continuous capacity building training to scale clean energy to over 5,000 people and professionals from more than 400 public and private institutions. This engagement with energy buyers led to more than 50 megawatts of renewable energy pipeline with over 2,000 megawatts of potential identified. The CEIA has also strengthened at least 16 policies, national policies, towards scale deployment of renewable energy. Next slide, please. Here we show our market transformation progress. In Vietnam, the CEIA has been working with partner companies and various development partners, such as the USAID VLEAP project, to support the growth of the rooftop solar market, increasing more than 2,000% from less than 20 megawatts in early 2019 to 470 megawatts in early 2020. We've also worked with the Global Green Growth Institute, or GGGI, to develop an innovative rooftop solar finance facility that will improve local loans available to commercial and industrial energy users. In Indonesia, the CEIA has been working with partner companies towards a critical regulatory change that is expected to improve the economics of rooftop solar projects, lowering the capacity charge for industrial users to 1/8 of its previous level. And the CEIA has also been actively engaging with PLN, the national utility, to share the technical expertise on renewable energy attributes such as RECs and to inform improved green power pricing models that will be effective for corporate buyers. In the Philippines, where I am based, the CEIA has been working to strengthen a suite of improved policies that create new opportunities for buyers and utilities, including net metering revisions and a Green Energy Option Program, or GEOP. It is also built capacity among electric cooperatives or those local utilities spread across the archipelago to navigate and exceed their renewable portfolio standards, or RPS targets. Next slide, please. In parallel to supporting market-enabling policies and transformation, the CEIA has been deeply engaging with purchasers to deploy clean energy. Next slide, please. In Vietnam, the CEIA has since expanded the Vietnam Working Group to a coalition of more than 120 corporate buyers, developers, and government officials. Working group members have participated in hundreds of megawatts of new projects as buyers, sellers, and investors. In the Philippines, the CEIA has brought together city and business leaders in the city of Santa Rosa to share cost-saving procurement pathways and is working with the whole supply chain of a major automotive industry player to shift to renewable energy. And in Indonesia, the CEIA has grown its Indonesia Working Group to a coalition of more than 30 major companies, which include Nike, H&M, and Unilever. And we held a first-in-kind public-private dialogues where corporate buyers shared challenges with government and PLN. Next slide, please. One of the core areas that is especially exciting as we hear net zero and 100% RE commitments from several corporates, and this work on developing a healthy renewable energy project pipeline by engaging with corporates. Next slide, please. In this slide, we provide a snapshot of CEIA's pipeline building activity in Southeast Asia. In Vietnam, the CEIA provided deep technical support for first-in-kind pilot projects with a major textile supply chain manufacturer and an industrial with scaled ambition and a prominent retail chain to bring solar solutions to 12 sites across Vietnam. In the Philippines, the CEIA is partnering with a major automotive company to support technical analysis and aggregated clean energy solutions for its 89 suppliers and 71 dealers. And in Indonesia, we have been deepening our engagement with supply chain partners, industrial estates, and special economic zones to develop new business models for renewable energy procurement. Next slide, please. On Wednesday at this ASEF week, we had the Asia launch of a new report by WRI and Ørsted on unlocking a renewable energy future, how government action can drive private investment, as it examines key challenges that can hinder private investment in renewable energy and provide governments, policymakers, and regulators with 3 actions they can take today. To unlock it, to unlock private sector investments, governments must work with the private sector to incentivize investment in renewable energy. And so this work on policy engagement is very important. Next slide, please. Here we see the progress to date of CEIA on the 3rd pillar for policy engagement. As mentioned earlier, we're working with the US8 VLIP and dozens of leading companies in Vietnam to inform a first-of-its-kind direct power purchase agreement, or DPPA, pilot program for 1,000 megawatt plus of clean energy. In the Philippines, the CEIA has partnered with policymakers to inform the Philippine energy transition and implementation of key policies, including renewable portfolio standards, green energy option program, and upcoming renewable energy auctions. And in Indonesia, we shared private sector insights to the government on major barriers, and these inputs from CEIA and others resulted in a revised regulation to reduce the capacity charge that significantly improves solar project economics for industrial energy users. Next slide, please. All these work come together via CEIA knowledge products and tools. Next slide, please. Through these engagements, the CEIA has produced a number of knowledge products accessible to everyone for free, including white papers, policy reports, and market-specific clean energy guidebooks. So you can just visit cleanenergyinvest.org for these knowledge products. Next slide, please. In light of the travel restrictions due to the pandemic, we've also been hosting free and public virtual dialogues with key public and private sector stakeholders to discuss clean energy policies and energy transition, recordings of which are also available in the CEIA website, cleanenergyinvest.org, along with the written knowledge products from the previous slide. Next slide, please. And so with this, thank you. Again, this is Marlon Joseph Apañada, Southeast Asia Engagement Lead for Climate and Energy at the World Resources Institute, and concurrently country lead for the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator in the Philippines. I look forward to touching base and working with you all as we all come together to make ambitions to a reality in this decisive decade of action as we unlock large-scale private sector investment in renewable energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marlon. That was great, and a great addition to our panel and to our discussion, so that we have always the perspective of the private sector in mind. So now let's look at the results from the previous poll question. So just as a reminder, the question was, what technology solutions do you prioritize for scaling up renewable energy in your country? And it looks like the winner is transmission and distribution network upgrades. And a close second was energy storage. So no big surprises here, but interesting to see that overall there's quite an even distribution among the top three answers here. Oh, it just changed. So now we've got a dead heat between energy storage and improved communications controls and operating practices for enhanced grid management. So now in the interest of time, let's go straight into the Q&A session. And again, I'll encourage all participants, if you have questions for any of our speakers, please submit them to the Q&A feature. We encourage you to keep engaged and ask questions throughout the panel session. So I've got a few questions already, and I'll start with Patty. So Patty, the first question is for you, and the question is about how countries can balance their priorities for economic development with other priorities and goals for clean energy and environmental justice goals.
Thank you for the question. Usually in my work in many countries, there is many policies tend to emphasize economic growth with environmental concerns and social and equity concerns taking the backseat. But I'm really also, I feel very good to see that in many countries, many stakeholders and decision makers are taking the right steps to start to balance the three goals. And that was exactly the goal of my presentation, to try to pay more attention to efforts to engage with different stakeholders, not only private stakeholders, but also community organizations, in order to make sure that our transition and our efforts to deploy clean technologies and clean energy really benefit those that need energy the most. The reality is that equity concerns take usually the backseat in many deployment efforts.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, and there's no really easy answer to that one. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Okay, so let's go to the next question. And I've got a few questions here for Galen. So let's start with this one. Galen, how is NREL's data different from other open access free sources, such as the World Bank, Global Wind Atlas, and Global Solar Atlas?
Yeah, important question, Ilya. So the data that's made available by the World Bank is very high quality data. It's modeled by some of the leading companies in producing resource data. However, they do not make the time series data available. So the data is extremely valuable for high level prospecting, and you can do kind of back of the envelope estimates of system performance, but it is not time series data. So it cannot be used in advanced modeling, such as really understanding the temporal components of generation, calculating capacity credit in capacity expansion modeling, and doing any sort of dispatch modeling, operations modeling. So that's what is unique about the NREL data is we're providing gridded time series data is available for free on the RE Data Explorer. You can download a single point. You can also download for a region. And the data is publicly available, covering everywhere from part of India all the way to the Hawaiian Islands. It covers East Asia, Southeast Asia, and Oceania. So, and then the other component is obviously the long temporal record. Providing 10 years of data allows to compute exceedance probabilities, to look at interannual variability, to look at seasonal trends. So that's really the big difference there, is that our data, our freely available data is the time series serial complete.
Thanks, Galen. And just a few quick follow-up questions. So first, does the Renewable Energy Data Explorer provide downloads of shape files? I guess
it'll be in CSV format. So when you because a time series doesn't fit in a shape file, that format doesn't support time series data. And so when you download it, if you just get one point, it'll send you a CSV. If you ask for multiple points, it'll zip those CSVs together. And so those can be easily translated into whatever format or model you're using. And I should also mention that the data is also made available through APIs and a data service called the Highly Scalable Data Service, the HSDS, on the Amazon Web Service Cloud. So we try to provide as many options as possible. So we have the RE Data Explorer, which is great for users that need a couple locations. When you start to need more data, that's when you can access the API and you really want to get your hands on the entire data set, which is extremely large. You can access it on the cloud.
Great, thanks. And a few other questions for you, Galen. So we've got a few questions coming in about where to access this data. How do you get to this website? And that will be provided after this session. So we'll provide all the slides and the links as well. And yeah, that will be available to you. One other question for you, Galen, is so who is the user base of the RE Data Explorer? So are these project developers? Are they investors? And who is interested in using this tool?
So the RE Data Explorer is really widely used. It provides some modeling tools, including technical potential and cost of energy. Those tools I see as more of screening tools. So the tool is definitely focused towards decision makers, but it's also used a lot by industry. It's a very valuable tool to engage a conversation with public utilities, with policymakers, with decision makers. So, we really see it as kind of facilitating kind of that visualization of data, understanding, the spatial dimension of RE potential, and just creating, a transparent platform that facilitates those types of dialogues. And then I guess, I think that it does connect with more sophisticated modeling. So you download that data and you can actually produce a technical potential layer, and you could download that. That could actually be used in a capacity expansion model. So there are some connections there. And then obviously that's where the time series data is, which really is, that is the downloaders tool is probably where some of those more advanced modeling applications really tie in for capacity expansion models, being able to access that data and plug it into their models.
Great, thanks, Galen. So we've got a lot of questions here to cover and just a little bit of time. So I'll ask the panelists just to keep your answers short if possible. So next quick question for Sunil. This is not an easy question, but I think it needs to be asked. So what's a starting point for countries if they're interested in adopting a model like India's for renewable energy management centers? Does it start at a policy level? Is it a regulatory process? What would you comment there?
Yeah, so definitely not an easy question, Ilya. But I believe, I think realizing that the status quo would not work is the starting point for any system. And why I'm saying so that because many a times when you do not have any RE penetration and you are working on a system in a specific manner, you think that we would be able to accommodate the renewable energy generators in the same system. But then that realization comes later that you need specific skills, specific tools, specific data sets to integrate the renewable energy generation into the existing grid. And the second point is to realize, we talked a lot about data, to realize that data is the new gold. And we faced this challenge during implementation of the REMCs in India, that we did not have complete data sets related to renewable energy generators, their technologies, what kind of technologies they are using, even the static data, then real-time data, the historical data we did not have. So that was a challenge. Even weather data was an issue initially. So I think to begin with, a policy on how to procure all that data and keep it available for their data analytical tools is a good starting point. And then just to finish it, at technology side as well, we need to be a little patient. Many a times it happens if you are doing certain analysis on data, for example, forecasting, it may not give you 100% result over time, because these are algorithms based on machine learning algorithms. So they train themselves with past data. So there is a need that we understand it and we give these solutions some time to stabilize. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Sunil. That was helpful and a nice, concise answer to a very complicated question. So next question here I have is for Marlon. Can you describe a success story of a private company that has invested in RE, or a private company that you've worked with, and discuss why it was successful?
All right, thanks, Ilya, for the question. Our deep dive workshop is called From Dreams to Reality, Achieving NDCs Through Power Sector Planning and Implementation. And a great example on your question from the Philippines are the investments and the divestments done by Ayala Corporation, the oldest and one of the largest conglomerates in the country, and its energy subsidiary, AC Energy. AC Energy is a relatively young player in the energy sector. And a decade ago, its portfolio was dominated by practically 100% fossil fuel power plants. In April 2020, last year, Eric Francia, President and CEO of AC Energy, announced that they aim to have a 50% renewable energy portfolio by 2025 and eventually fully divest from coal by 2030. They have met this goal ahead of time, and as of now has 78% of renewable energy in their 2,500 megawatt portfolio. And in a disclosure to the Philippine Stock Exchange in March 2021, AC Energy reported recording a 2,812% jump in its net income for 2020. At almost 4 billion pesos from 133 million pesos in 2019 due to higher electricity sales from this portfolio. And it is now focusing on achieving its 5 gigawatt renewables target by 2025. It has since become as well a stock market darling, exciting local investors, and AC Energy has recently completed a stock rights offering, the net proceeds for which will be used as they aim to be Southeast Asia's largest listed energy company. So that's a great success story, if you ask me.
Excellent, thanks, Marlon. That was, a very exciting success story. And I really do wish that we had time for more questions and to answer all the questions, but unfortunately, I think we have time just for one more. So I think we'll end with one more question for Patty. So we had a question about power sector planning that is very concentrated at the centralized national government level. And are there initiatives to encourage a more bottom-up approach wherein local governments and other stakeholders can be more involved and invested in the power sector planning process? And can you describe those kinds of efforts?
Yeah, there are several initiatives, and there are also historic examples of, not the historic, but there are initiatives seeking to have a decentralized system that has many advantages for once, given that renewables depend on solar and wind and other resources that vary with climate variability. It is important to have redundancy and to be flexible enough to use energy from different sources when confronted with a heat wave, for instance. So currently the discussion is how to implement those in ways that allow the system to be redundant, to be flexible, to be robust vis-a-vis all these threats. included cyber attacks. The question is, in my experience, the question is, how do we overcome inertias and path dependencies given by how systems have been historically constructed? Like changing infrastructures, as you saw in my example, is an endeavor that takes decades. And so I think we are just now in the process of shifting away from our current centralized systems. For me, the way forward is to have like a nested approach whereby you still will have some national entity, but different sub-entities that will be operating like pulsing, right? Like, one will chime in and respond to energy demand in case that is coming from another area that is suffering from oscillations in the provision of energy. But yeah, there are already examples that we can consider promising, right? The challenge is how to shift from single examples, isolated examples, to upscale the promotion of decentralized energy systems.
Great. Thank you, Patty. And with that, we are out of time. So I just want to thank all of the panelists. Thank you so much for participating, for sharing your expertise. I also want to thank Steve Olive for his excellent opening remarks. And thank you for all the participants for joining us today. I hope this was a very enlightening and productive session. Thank you for your questions and for participating in the polls. We wish you a very nice day or evening, depending on your time zone, and hope that you had an excellent ASEP. I know that I did. And so thank you very much, and have a good evening. Have a good morning.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.